It is an absolute honor for SAFT Apologetics, an absolute delight for myself personally and for our entire team to welcome the very famous, our very own Dr. Frank Turek to take the inaugural session at Areopagus 2021.
Jacob, thanks for having me. I hope everyone can hear me all right. If you can, give me a thumbs up or give me some sort of indication through one of those emojis that you can hear me. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Maybe they can't hear me. Can they hear me, Jacob?
Yep. They're just flowing in with the thumbs ups.
Oh, okay. Good. All right. Well, I wanted to show you guys some slides, but for some reason we can't get it to work. So let me just start out by saying what I'd like to talk about briefly and then go to your questions is this idea that atheists have to steal from God in order to make their own theories work. I mean, you always hear atheists saying things like this. They'll say, well, you know, there's too much evil in the world, so there can't be a good God. Or they'll say reason is atheistic. Or science has somehow disproven God. They say things like that, and they try and get people to say, yeah, you know, if there's too much evil, there can't be a good God. Science has disproven God. Reason is much more atheistic than it is, say, Christian or theistic. And I don't think any of those things hold. I think that some of your best arguments to doubt God show that he actually exists. Let me say that again. Some of your best arguments to doubt God show that he actually exists. Let me just give you a few examples of this. In this book, Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case, I lay out an acronym. The acronym is CRIMES, C-R-I-M-E-S, C-R-I-M-E-S. And I think that these are things that atheists sometimes claim support atheism, but none of these things would exist unless God existed. The C stands for causality. The R stands for reason. The I stands for information. The M stands for morality. The E stands for evil. And the S stands for science. In other words, I hear atheists saying causality, reason, information, morality, evil, and science somehow show God doesn't exist. My hypothesis is that those things would not exist unless God existed. Now you say, how can that be, Frank? Well, let's begin by pointing out that most atheists today are materialists. They think everything's made of molecules. They think there are no immaterial realities. You don't have a soul, you just have a body. You don't have a mind, you just have a brain. You don't have free will because every single thought you have is caused by the laws of physics. You are nothing but a moist robot. Everything you think, everything you do is caused by natural laws, and you really don't have free will. So most atheists today believe that they're materialists. Well, the things I just mentioned, causality, reason, information, morality, evil, and science, can't be explained completely by materialism. They can't be explained just by molecules bumping into one another. Let's take reason, the second one in the acronym. You hear atheists claiming that they're the reasonable ones, that atheism is reasonable and theism or Christianity is unreasonable. Well, let me ask you guys a question. If I were to say to you, there is no truth, what question would you ask me? You would say, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth, right? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. In other words, the claim there is no truth is a self-defeating claim. It's logically self-defeating. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. If I were to say that, I'd be using English to say it, right? You with me? Okay. Well, if somebody comes along like an atheist and that person says, all my thoughts are determined by the laws of physics, what question would you ask that person? It would be the same type of question you ask the person who says there is no truth. You would apply the claim to itself, or you would turn the claim on itself and you would say, is that thought completely determined by the laws of physics? Because if all thoughts are determined by the laws of physics, so is the thought that you just said all thoughts are determined by the laws of physics. So why should you believe it? If all thoughts are determined by the laws of physics, then the thought that atheism is true is determined by the laws of physics, because you're not arriving at it freely. You don't have free will. You're a moist robot. So why should you believe it? In other words, atheism, materialistic atheism, has made reason impossible. According to atheism, you're just, as I say, a moist robot. You don't have any free will. You're not reasoning. You're just reacting. Well, if you're just reacting, how can you follow reason? You can't. And look, nobody said anything better than C.S. Lewis. So I'm going to read you a quote from C.S. Lewis, and I think this nails the point I'm trying to make. All right, stick with me. It's a pretty long quote. You ready? Here's what Lewis said. He said, suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. Did you catch that? I mean, you can't say it any better than that. That if there's no intelligence behind the universe, I shouldn't trust my own thinking, and which means I can't trust my own thinking leading to atheism. The only way I can trust my own thinking is to believe in God, because it makes sense that I could think truths about reality if my mind and your mind is made in the image of the great mind. And he has made our minds in order to know truth outside of our skulls. Again, if we're just molecular machines, if we're just molecules in motion bumping into one another, we shouldn't trust anything we think. But we do trust things we think. What explains our ability to reason? What explains our ability to think? Certainly not just natural law. Natural law is part of it, but it can't explain all of it. The reason we can think, the reason we can know things, is best explained by theism, by God, who is a mind and made our minds in the image of his mind. In fact, it was J.B.S. Haldane, who was an evolutionist and a philosopher many years ago. He said this. He realized his own materialistic worldview was self-defeating. Here's what he said. He said, if my mental processes are determined wholly by the motions of atoms in my brain, I have no reason to suppose that my beliefs are true, and hence I have no reason for supposing my brain is composed of atoms. You see, he's realizing the self-defeating nature of his own philosophy. Daniel Dennett, who is a new atheist today, one of the primary leaders of the new atheist movement, he teaches at Tufts University here in America. He said, consciousness is an illusion. Well, one wonders if Dennett was conscious when he wrote that, right? I mean, in order to say consciousness is an illusion, you'd have to assume your own consciousness is an illusion, which means you shouldn't trust anything you think, including the thought that consciousness is an illusion. Do you guys see the problem with materialistic atheism? It makes reason impossible. Yet they're trying to claim that reason points to atheism, when in fact, reason doesn't point anywhere unless it can be relied upon. And the only reason it can be relied upon is not because it's just molecules in motion, but because your mind is made in the image of the great mind, and it can ascertain truths about the real world. You don't just have a brain, you also have a mind. You don't just have a body, you also have a soul. And that allows you to follow the truth wherever it leads. It allows you to reason. Without an immaterial reality as a soul or a mind. You can't reason, I can't reason, no one can reason, and yet atheists try and steal reason from God in order to say he doesn't exist. Let me give you one other point on this, and that is from John Lennox, who is a brilliant philosopher and mathematician from Oxford University. Lennox has debated Richard Dawkins a couple of times. You can find these debates on YouTube. I highly recommend you do. And Dawkins, Lennox has said to some of his atheistic colleagues at Oxford, he's asked them a question. He'll say, how do you do science? And quite frequently what these atheists will say is they'll start talking about some sort of device or some sort of equipment they have in their laboratory. And Lennox goes, no. I don't mean how you do science in the lab. I mean, how do you do science here? And they say, oh, you mean with my mind? They start to say mind, and then they catch themselves because they realize they don't believe in a mind. They just believe in a brain. So they'll say, you mean with my brain? And Lennox will say, yes. Tell me how your brain came to be. And the atheistic scientist would say something like, well, my brain is the product of random forces that didn't have an end in mind. And then Lennox would say, and you trust it? I mean, why would you trust such a thing that wasn't really designed? It just came together by blind natural forces. You shouldn't trust it. The only reason you should trust your mind is because it was made, again, by a greater mind, by intelligence. I mean, if it were possible for a computer to be put together by natural law, which it's not, but if it were, would you trust anything the computer told you? No, because you know that it wasn't put together with intelligence. So reason can't, in fact, the laws of logic can't exist if atheism were true, materialistic atheism. Why? Laws of logic are immaterial realities. They're not made of molecules. Yet atheists say everything's made of molecules. Well, if everything's made of molecules, you and I couldn't communicate right now because there are no molecules being transferred from my mind to your mind right now. This is actually, we're talking right now thousands of miles away over some digital computing and the internet. There are no molecules going from my mind to your mind right now, yet you're understanding what I'm saying, at least I hope. Why? Because there's these immaterial laws of logic that are grounded in the nature of God, and that allows my mind to communicate with your mind. I use those laws and you use those laws so we can understand one another. If those laws didn't exist, we couldn't get out of our own skulls. Yet they do exist. That's why we can talk to one another. And they're best explained, again, by an immaterial reality, an immaterial standard that we call God. Finally, I've noticed one other thing when talking about reason, that atheists, here's the main problem with atheism on this. They exempt themselves from their own theories. In other words, they say, everybody is a molecular machine except me, the atheist. I'm not a molecular machine. I can reason to valid conclusions because I can follow the evidence where it leads. You're a molecular machine, but I'm not, right? Or they'll say, like Daniel Dennett says, consciousness is an illusion. But he doesn't think his consciousness is an illusion, right? He's exempting himself from his own theory. He realizes he needs consciousness to write books to say that consciousness is an illusion, okay? He's exempting himself from his own theory. That's what Daniel Dennett is doing and other atheists are doing. And you just have to call them on it. You have to say, wait a minute. In order for you to say consciousness is an illusion, first of all, you'd have to be outside of your own consciousness in order to see that the consciousness you have here is an illusion, right? You'd have to get beyond the illusion. Think about it this way. How do you know that you're just having a dream? What has to happen to you? Well, you have to wake up. You have to get outside of the dream to know that the experience you just had was a dream. You'd have to get beyond it to see it was just a dream. The same thing is true if you're going to say your consciousness is an illusion. You'd have to get outside of your consciousness to see, oh, my consciousness here is just an illusion. It's just a dream. In other words, you'd have to be someone like God. You'd have to get outside of your own consciousness in order to see that human being consciousness is just an illusion. So this is really self-defeating nonsense, what the atheists bring up. And I think you just need to call them on it. You just need to say, look, you're stealing from God in order to argue against him. So they do that with reason. Let me just do one more and then we'll go to your questions. How about the question of evil? That's probably the biggest objection to a good God. If there is a good God, why is there evil? There's an entire chapter on that here in the book, Stealing from God. Obviously, I can't cover it at all here in the next 5 minutes. And Richard Dawkins, by the way, has said things like this. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all in fiction, jealous and proud of it, an unforgiving, unjust control freak, a vindictive ethnic cleanser, misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, capriciously malevolent bully. Something like that. You know how Dawkins is a great writer, by the way. So he'll say stuff like that. He'll basically call God evil, right? Yet on the other hand, Dawkins will say things like, this universe is just what we would expect if it was governed by natural laws. There is no good. There is no evil. There is no justice. We just dance to our DNA. All right, time out. How, on one hand, can you, Richard Dawkins, call the God of the Old Testament unjust and evil, yet on the other hand, at the same time, say there is no good and there is no evil? We just all dance to our DNA. You can't have it both ways. In other words, in order for evil to exist, on one hand, Dawkins is saying it does exist. On the other hand, he's saying it doesn't. But in order for evil to exist, good must exist. Why? Because evil is a lack in a good thing. Evil does not exist on its own. It only exists as a lack or a privation or a deficiency in a good thing. You see, evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You don't have anything. In other words, evil doesn't exist on its own. Evil only exists as a lack in a good thing. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you have a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? Well, you've got nothing. Rust doesn't exist unless it's existing in a good thing, good metal, right? So if evil exists, good exists. But if good exists, God exists, because what we mean by good is God's nature. So evil does not disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but evil doesn't disprove God, because there would be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there would be no such thing as good unless God existed. Because if God doesn't exist, we can't call anything good or evil. There's no standard except our own opinion. But if God's nature is good, then any deviation from that nature is what we would call evil, or a lack in a good thing. So atheists understand there's evil, but what they don't understand is by admitting that there's evil, they are presupposing God. Now, this doesn't prove the Christian God, don't get me wrong. It does prove some theistic God. In order to prove the Christian God, you have to look at history and see if Jesus rose from the dead. And we do that as well. If Jesus did rise from the dead, then Christianity's true. So atheists have to steal even a standard from God to know what evil is. So if they're going to complain about evil, or there's too much evil in the world, they're actually presupposing that God exists. And so many of the objections to Christianity are moral objections. which is another aspect of the book, Stealing from God. The M in crime stands for morality, right? They're trying to say that God is immoral, say in the Old Testament, for doing certain things, killing the Canaanites or whatever. Well, what are they doing when they say that? They are assuming a standard. They're assuming a moral standard. And they're saying the God of the Bible doesn't meet the moral standard that they think is right. Well, wait a minute. If there's no God, there is no moral standard. You can't complain about anything. It's just your opinion. Now, if God does exist, then there is a moral standard. Now, this is certainly possible. It's certainly possible that God exists, but he's not the God of the Bible. If that's the case, then you might have an argument against the God of the Old Testament or some of the things you think are immoral in the Old Testament. The problem is, if you try and say God does exist and the God of the Bible is not the true God, then you have to deal with all the evidence which seems to show that the God of the Bible is the true God. And the strongest evidence is the evidence for Jesus and the evidence for the resurrection and the evidence from Old Testament prophecy, which we cover in Stealing from God and another book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. The bottom line is you can't complain about evil unless there's good, and there can't be good unless God exists. So again, when atheists are arguing there is no God because of evil or because God is immoral, they're presupposing that God exists. Again, it doesn't necessarily prove the Christian God, but it does show that there must be a theistic God out there and that his nature is the standard of good. We can then go on and give arguments that the God of the Bible is the true God. Now, there's much more in the book. We don't have time to cover it all here, but if you have any questions about any of the other points, you can bring them up right now during the Q&A, or we can expound more upon what we've talked about. But I think it's much more interesting to go to questions than to hear me keep talking. So if you have any questions on this or anything else, we can talk about it. So Jacob, why don't you come back on and let's do Q&A.